Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Reid, there's a couple updates to the studio today. One is, have you noticed the camera's higher than usual?
No, I have not.
Yeah, I didn't think you cared.
So not the kinds of things I'm known to notice.
I learned that this tripod, fancy tripod, has an extra, 11 inches to it or something.
Oh, wow.
Before I was always, struggling to get it over the top of this high bar. Which, by the way, I think I may have told you this when Miranda got this. It is really nice, and, I applauded her for, as far as particle board, this is the best kind of particle board I've seen. But I have a thing against, high tops. I don't know. I don't want my feet dingle-dangling. This is why I could never be a director.
Yeah, but we have a bar down here to rest it on.
This is the best. That's what I'm saying. This is actually the best setup because it actually, you do have places for your feet, and I'm not swinging it like a child.
So she overcame 2 of your pet peeves.
It's amazing. I don't know how she did it. She pulled it off.
David hates particle board and doesn't like his feet to dangle.
Yeah.
He's okay with this table.
No, it went well. It went well. So there's that with the camera, and then we're trying a different software this time, but we can only see half of our faces. So let's hope it actually records the whole frame.
Yeah. That I did notice. And I've told you this story before, but I think it's worth those listening to hear it because it's pretty humorous, I guess, or pathetic, depending on your perspective. But when I was in pharmaceuticals, you had to call on the same doctors every 2 weeks. And my universe, as they would call it there, was about 200 doctors. And so not nothing, but I did, over the course of almost 3 years, see the same people over and over and over, and often would stand in the exact same spot within that doctor's office while I waited. And
you mean in the waiting room?
Right, right. Different spots that I would either hide out or hang out. And Dr. White, it was in Cleburne, Texas. Love you, Dr. White. Super friendly guy, always willing to chat with me, but he'd be like, my priority is obviously my patients, so sometimes you're going to have to wait a little bit longer, maybe for me than you do for other doctors. And he was right. Sometimes I'd sit there for 20 or 30 minutes in the exact same spot, just waiting. And then before I left, Miranda and I went to Spain. I was just saying my goodbyes to all my doctors. And I said, Dr. White, it's been real. Love you, and I hope we stay in touch. And oh, by the way, this is a really nice painting here. This is beautiful. When did you guys put that up? And it was just dead silence. And he, I think, honestly thought I was just deadpan humor.
Yeah.
And then he realized I wasn't joking. And he's like, Reid, you've been standing in that same corner for the last almost 3 years that I've seen you. And that painting was there 3 years before you got here. I was like, well, my attention to detail has never been my strongest suit. So just general observations.
Do you remember what the painting was?
Oh, God. No, it just had a lot of colors.
Yeah,
it's very colorful.
I've heard this story before, but sometimes I try to get a new
data
point.
New detail. That's the irony, right? That you're going to get a new detail, or maybe a little different way that I might tell it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that are funny about that, but it's also before cell phones were really a thing, right?
For sure, yeah.
This wasn't like you could have been just on your iPhone, screwing around or something.
No, I had a BlackBerry, but the internet browser and apps hadn't, mobile apps hadn't really taken off. So yeah, there wasn't a lot to do other than just sit there and smile at everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you have it.
Yeah. Well done. Well, today we are going to talk about single-family rentals, but I also finished the book. Great by Choice, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago, but there are 2 things in that book that you had wanted me to get to. One was SMaC Recipes and 20-Mile March, and then Bullets and Cannons, so I guess there's actually 3 large things. But which way did you want to go? Because we were saying this is actually kind of connected to single family.
Super connected. I think all 3, in fact, you could say this whole book, is pertinent for us as we think about single family, meaning whether we want to get into it or not. And we've already, just not to shortcut this, but I think both aligned on let's shoot a bullet at single family, but definitely not ready to wheel out the cannon. And so very simply put, it's not like a groundbreaking analogy, but bullets are meant to be the test and learn that happens at companies. You should always be trying to innovate, experiment, see if there's opportunity somewhere that, you might want to ultimately shoot a cannon and get really serious about. And so, Yeah, to this point, I don't feel like we've done too much of that, not meaning in a bad way, but we've been very contained. We've said no to so many people that have asked us to do either consultant work, maybe run media outside of multifamily. So, we've shot our cannon at multifamily and obviously I think been really successful. But now as we think about the next 4 or 5 years, if there's one kind of adjacent category, if you will, to multifamily, that has really gotten our interest as of late, it's single family rentals. And so this SMaC recipe is really about the do's and do's and do nots, like the operating code of a company and how important that is, that you know what you're committed to and what you're not committed to. And I think he hit that in the book pretty hard. Is it's a little bit harder to come up with the nots than it is the do's, right? Because as a company, you kind of feel like you know your identity. These are the things that we're going to stay true to or committed to, but way harder, especially as you look further out, to say this is what we're not going to be focused on. So I'm sure you'll have some good, because you read it more recently than me, references to those knots, like Southwest, for example. He really hit that hard. And then the 20-mile march, also not some insane like analogy here, but it's just the consistency of not and being almost as uncomfortable pursuing maybe potential and growth as it is when things aren't going so well, to still hit a certain benchmark, a certain milestone. And so he said so many companies, when they see growth opportunities or they have momentum, they can't help themselves. They just keep going, and that can get you into real trouble. And it's way wiser to establish what that key benchmark is or milestone that you need to hit over and over again as a company, with longevity, in order to stay successful, versus kind of the erratic highs and lows that come with chasing the next big thing.
Right. So as I see it, first off is bullet versus cannon, and I also want to bring up focus. Like he talks in his other books about how you need to have extreme focus, and so does EOS, which we've talked a lot about. So when you talk about multifamily, I often think of like we do property management advertising, but most of our stuff has been multifamily, and we've had maybe 20% related to either senior living or student housing, and we've had, I don't even know, like in less than 5% for like military housing. So how much is it losing focus by moving into, like, let's say senior living or student housing first, meaning with a larger bullet, with a more of a cannon? Because as you said, we've sort of like cannoned multifamily specifically. And then, because I see those as almost like closer, as you said, adjacent, as opposed to single family rentals. Those to me, it seems just a little bit different. So how are you thinking about, like, when are we losing focus by starting to go into some of these other subcategories?
Fantastic question, and I'm truly struggling with that myself right now, because I had thought about it, not maybe quite as directly as you just put it, but about that point of what's the distinction between getting more serious about senior living than it would be to go into single family like rentals. So I feel like as long as we're staying within real estate and rentals, we're still staying pretty focused, because again, between our backgrounds and our technology, we both know there's a lot of other places that we could take this company, or at least do some experimentation. So I feel pretty comfortable as long as rental and real estate are in the equation. But the thing about the single family that I think is so different for us, and we've already heard this from the people we've talked to, is the scattered nature of it versus what you see typically with multifamily, senior living, student housing, is their communities. And so kind of this independent like unit, I guess, that you're trying to market or fill, is far more what I believe would be challenging. But I could be wrong than what we're accustomed to, which is again like community living, if you will. So that's the biggest separation I see, as well as us just not having as much of the data as we do, like in some of those other categories that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think you're right. He would have to say something with focus regarding, like maybe it's like you in relation to your market size. So like he talks a lot about Southwest Airlines and how they were like obviously at first like really going after the Southwest, and then they slowly expanded out and out and out. And I think he would be their niche at first was like, let's say Texas, like point to point.
Yeah,
Right.
geographically, yeah.
Yeah. So for us, as we have gotten larger with multifamily, then as you start to expand that scope into larger, let's say rentals, as you're saying, then I think you're still close enough. And many folks just say like they're a real estate agency, and they're talking everything from commercial to whatever, multifamily to housing, like for sale housing. What I think you would discount, at least on the rental side, more of the VRBOs or vacation rentals, right? Like you're more thinking long-term rentals.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think even with that, it's still pretty focused, even if you are saying single-family rentals versus multifamily.
Right.
And
That's a good point. Yeah.
so I think, but over time, I don't know what that looks like. You and I have talked about how the definition of monopoly was having 40% of the market. So like Coca-Cola, having 40% of the market. So is it related at all to that, where it's like once you have 20% of the market now, and I think he doesn't define that, to your point. Maybe you said this before we started recording, but on purpose, because he kind of wants you to come up with your own rules, let's say. And so maybe for Digible, it's like maybe it's not even percentage in the market, but maybe there's something to that nature as far as reach.
Yeah, there's definitely, he does highlight the relativity, within companies and industries. So we couldn't think about it necessarily. There isn't just a general, I guess, numbers to work around when it comes to, what your focus is or monopolies or anything else.
Yeah. So let's say then, like we've shot a couple bullets at single family so far. We've had a number of clients, so we haven't focused on that. So now the question is more, does it make sense for Digible to shoot a cannon at single family rentals, or let's say shoot a cannon at senior or student? Because I'd say we haven't done those either. I mean, that we get them and we've had, I don't know, over 100 of those properties. So in some sense, it's like we have some scale, but in another sense, it's like it's not nearly the scale we've had with multifamily. So we sometimes discount it when many other people would be like, shoot, you've done over 100. That's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, how do you, I guess, how do we want to settle with that internally? Is the cannon, so I guess how would we define cannon versus bullet internally? Or is it more of like is it more about the deliberateness versus like what sort of just falls over the transom?
I think it's a combination of risk, capital, and effort level. And I don't, again, we're working actually right now with Ryan, our controller, on trying to establish this for Digible. So
I think you promoted him to VP of Finance. Didn't you? Give him his due.
That's fine. We'll call him VP of Finance. We have bigger plans for him, and he knows that. So just trying to behave myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's those three, and I don't know if that's a little bit like, in this cannon, it's more about the capital. This cannon, it's more about the effort, and this capital, it's more about this cannon, it's more about the risk. But those are the three. I don't feel like right now we've taken on too much of risk. We haven't made any major capital commitments, meaning investment in data or people. And what was the third one that I said? Risk and capital and effort, right? And from an effort standpoint, I don't believe we've had like a ton of, I guess, internal workshops, research, meetings, at least that I've been a part of. So that would be my three. And I don't, like I said, have specific percentages there. But if you were to say, hey, Reid, I think we need to hire somebody to really lead this. And then we were going to say, we also need to have like recurring meetings devoted towards better understanding the space. And if this doesn't work, this could be painful, then I would tell you it's a cannon.
Yeah. So I think that the way I'm thinking about bullets and cannons are they're deliberate acts to go after something versus just receiving. So, I mean, we could have said bullets and cannons versus like C-class properties versus A-class properties, but neither of those.
But aren't bullets? Sorry to interrupt you, but aren't bullets also deliberate?
That's what I'm saying. I think bullets are also deliberate. I think both of those are deliberate. So I think that's more of, I'll use websites we've talked about. Like I think with websites, we're doing a bullet right now. If all things go as we expect, we'll do a cannon, but we're being deliberate to build a website program, and then we're going to go loud with it, let's say next year. Versus, let's say, single family rentals. That's almost like people coming at us and saying, hey, I've got the single family rental. You're the best folks I know for this. Please take it. Mm-hmm. And so that's not us shooting a bullet or a cannon. It's just now we are accepting that business versus turning it down.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
So then SMaC Recipe, though, I do think also applies to this to say, would we turn our eye towards single family rentals deliberately? So I don't think you gave a lot on SMaC in your lead up.
Well, the acronym is SMAC, and the A is little, as he said, but specific, methodical, and consistent. And so he just said companies that had success, didn't just survive like kind of chaotic or turbulent like stretches within their industry, but actually thrived. So one of his best examples was Southwest Airlines, the only airline company to turn a profit over the last 3 or 4 decades, through recession, through fuel shortages, and et cetera. All the things that industry was confronted with. And he said one of the biggest reasons is because they, were so committed to their SMaC recipe, meaning very specific operating code on essentially what you will or won't do. And examples of that were like going international. We're never going to like charge lots of rates. We're not going to charge for luggage. Some of these things still, if not a lot, exist today when you hear like Southwest marketing, because they also, I think, on the we're never going to have assigned seats. And it's been a great, I don't want to call it a ploy, but just technique or strategy for them as a business, but also, it's manifested into quite a brand reputation and marketing. But the other side of that nobody, well, not nobody, but many people don't realize was how long their list was of things that they would never do. So I mentioned just a couple of them, and I don't have them committed to memory, but that's the tee up, I guess. And he, I think, did a good job, as he always does with the research, and said in the, whatever it was, I don't know if you remember, 10 to 12 companies, because then he had comps for each one of those. So it's somewhere between 10 and 20 publicly traded companies that he did research on, and pretty much all of his books have that same number. And he goes with the public because he gets way more information. But he said that those that stayed within 10 to 20% of their SMaC recipe, had 6 or 8x, the return in growth. And again, correct me if I'm wrong on some of those numbers, but it was pretty staggering. And he's like, the companies that veered, and he, I think, used this as the talking about chasing the next big thing, but that they were always looking either because of the pressure of growth or because, they just easily were distracted. But that the companies that weren't successful were like, I don't know, 60 or 70% of the time they would veer from what their original recipe was. So it takes a lot of vision, I think, right? And foresight. That's what is so impressive about Southwest and some of the other companies that had success, is that they didn't alter that SMaC recipe. It wasn't like they just kept massaging it so that they could hit it. They really stayed true to it for multiple decades. And that's something that, I'd love for us to feel that, I guess, committed and confident about, but we haven't gone through that process. But it all, of course, ties to this conversation. You're talking about single family. At what point are we breaking our operating code?
So just to give more color on SMaC so that it maybe makes sense for the listeners, but Southwest had said that they would not do food service, for example. So they would just do drinks, effectively. They said they would only fly the 737 plane instead of having multiple planes.
That's a big one, yeah.
You got to have multiple parts and whatnot. They said they would bring every plane back every night to Dallas, so that they only had one shop to work to work on the planes versus having to have multiple shops. And that all played into their strategy of having like one city that they fly out from, and basically out and back, out and back, out and back. Versus these other airlines that he said, like Pacific, tried to start going like overseas, for example, or whatnot. And that was the comparable company, was the Pacific Airlines. So he had more, but those were ones that stuck big for me, like food service. Like that's just very clearly, we're not going to do food. We're going to do whatever. You get your Chex Mix. They do the off-brand. Sorry, Reid. And they'll do drink service.
It's definitely off-brand. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah.
But I still eat it.
Yeah.
Before I forget, because I know you're, but the one that I used to always tell you about is Expeditors. Their SMaC recipe.
7%, right?
6.
Oh, 6%.
Yeah. And they've split their stock like 2 or 3 times since they were founded in 1976. But quick reference, insider reference here. David's heard this a million times and has asked me a few times whether we should adopt something like this. But is this company, Expeditors, out of Seattle, that's in logistics, refused to take on more than 6% of revenue from any one client. And as they built their reputation, they had some of the biggest clients, in fact, the biggest client in the world, Walmart, coming to them, begging them almost to take, quite a bit more than 6%. But they just refused. And my wife, who used to work there, was in some of those meetings, and she just said, I couldn't believe it. After the pitches that Walmart would come in, laying it all out there, the amount of growth that we would see, the prestige of having Walmart as one of your dominant clients, but they just refused because they believed that they needed to maintain enough diversity so that there wasn't ever going to be a situation where they were top heavy. And it just, great. It didn't even occur to me until you were like talking about Southwest. I was like, oh, that's that example that I used to talk to you about.
Yeah, that's true. It also reminds me of the Happiness book or whatever, where from Zappos, where he was saying that they went and got the one warehousing and they just like, it didn't work for them. They had to, that was also your core competency. So it was both like they were too big of a client for that one plus core competency.
Right. Well, and they also, I don't think I told you this, but Expeditors said part of their SMaC Recipe was we will never own our own trucks or our own planes. And so I can't tell you why, but they just said, I think part of it was just the maintenance, the management, replacing it, maybe liability, I don't know. But they said no matter what, we will never own that stuff. And you think, well, I don't know. I'd just be speculating, but I just know that was another part of their operating
and you
code.
think most companies would want to own it for the asset and also like because you might consider that your core competency, but you're saying, no, you can be a logistics company and that not be.
I'm going to follow up on that myself.
So as far as Digibles, I think one thing to highlight that you brought up or just make it clear is that Southwest had the same SMaC Recipe for like 30 years. So Collins had made the point, like, you don't need to switch. A lot of people think in turbulent times you need to be like switching up your recipe, but it's more of like stick with your strengths, like stick with what made you great and then like carry that. And then yes, over time modify it, but be deliberate. So Southwest moved on from the 737 at some point, but very deliberate about it. I think when they did, they were actually a big part of that Boeing documentary where they got some bad flack because
I still haven't seen it.
It's good.
Is it good?
Yeah, but they were the first ones to place all the orders for those new planes because the fuel economy was like 20% better. So it was like, oh, great, now because they're standardized fleet, they'll just move everything over here and then they'll just be 20% more efficient than everybody else, and that's the highest cost is the fuel. But unfortunately, the plane had a problem with it, and so that caused that was real hard for Southwest, but they still made it through. So anyways, for us, I'd say we've hit pretty, I'd say firmly on like no startup fees. So like as far as like the do nots but for do's, we've had like the personalized service. So it's not like you get some like cute inbox or something. We've also have response time, which Nicole and team measure that every week in their one-on-ones. And then I'd say like when we release a product, it's got to be additive. It's got to be semi-innovative on what's out there in the industry and not just be a copycat. And I think even with something as commoditized as paid search, we've shown to do that along the way. So I'm sure our list could be bigger, but that would be a really fun exercise to go through and say, are there any other things that we are not willing to break because we know it makes us great?
Yeah, well, those are great call outs. And maybe for us, as weird as this sounds, it's backwards, and it'd be harder for us to figure out what we will always do because we enjoy so much, innovating, experimenting, and evolving. And so if that's the nature of your company, a big part of your identity, it seems like it might be harder to say this is what we'll always do. Unless you get a little generic with it, which he warns about, and that's why the S, he emphasizes that so much. But he's like, a lot of companies feel like they've got a SMaC recipe, but it's because they have relatively generic kind of narratives. And so it becomes much harder when you're specific about what you will and won't do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think he said the plane turn has to be 10 minutes. And I didn't know what he meant by the turn. Is that just like the flight crew cleaning up between? Or is that like have it back going out the door? Because
it's not possible.
That's what I'm saying. I was like, there's no way. Yeah. I mean, it takes way more than 10 minutes to get boarded. So it's got to be maybe like the cleanup in between or something, which would help with lack of food service because now you don't have all the garbage, and whatnot. So none of those things though that I mentioned, the startup fees, the innovation, the personalized service, the response time, none of those things to me disqualify single family, meaning moving into single family rentals. Now, none of those, I guess if you want to say do, is like, I guess your do category could be like long-term real estate rentals, for example. That way you're like helping focus on the niche and saying not leaving rentals, to your point earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think in a different book, and he said it's not a coincidence that there's a lot of overlap in I guess some of those lessons, the lessons in these books, but is the hedgehog, I guess philosophy or approach, which is just be great at one thing. And I don't want to say he contradicts himself when he talks about the flywheel, but sometimes it feels like that, where it's like the flywheel is just a natural extension as you build up momentum in your business, that you see these other opportunities that, are just so obvious, I guess, sensible, that you do pick them up and it just continues to add to your flywheel. So this is still, not to talk in circles, but this is still getting back to like, does single family, help, build our flywheel, or does it actually slow us down? And, maybe it's just as simple as the level of distraction that this would or wouldn't cause. But how do you really know that? And that's the point of the bullets, I guess, versus the cannons, is that if we do this smartly, then we'll be able to find out whether this belongs or could contribute to our flywheel, or ultimately actually slow us down.
Well, you'd think it would contribute if, so the big market assumptions that we've seen so far is that our clients and the ownership groups and investment firms that have been doing traditionally multifamily have started to look for opportunity in single family. So to me, it would add to the flywheel so long as because of those customers, where it's like, oh shoot, you do our multifamily, let's go ahead and let you do our single family. Because part of the issue is they don't want to have to juggle multiple firms, multiple workflows, whatever, for their marketing. And so in that instance, I think it would be additive. It's similar to when you talk about focus, like Digible could have been just a paid search multifamily like agency, but yet more clients come to us because we have a lot of different paid media products, and then all of those products are, I'd say best in class, the way that we treat them compared to what's out there. So it's not just like the quick grab for cash. So the more products we add, it seems like the more people come to us because they want one source to do all their work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it actually would help the flywheel, not slow it down.
Yeah, I mean, the other really compelling reasons that we haven't got at yet, but we've somewhat mentioned in previous podcasts, is just the dynamics right now of real estate. The really tectonic shifts that are happening as far as the trends between single family, multifamily, and then obviously the demographics that are really motivating that change, and then this crazy housing environment that we're in, and then also knowing what's ahead, which is the inflation, and then the interest rates changing, and then also not like the land battles, I guess, of where and how much you can actually develop, and if there is a lack of inventory, which is the reason that I think you and I also are somewhat interested, I guess, if not feeling maybe that this is just going to happen and needs to happen for us, is that more and more folks looking for homes just aren't going to find and they're not going to want to settle. And as a result, rather than overpaying and not sure when they're going to recoup their cash, whether it's because they're downsizing, whether they're trying to get in their first home, none of that almost matters. It's just there's such a lack of inventory and rates are so high right now. Why not bide yourself some time, and instead of staying in a multifamily, transition or stay, I guess, in a single family rental until it makes more sense? And so is this kind of the next boom, as we've seen it in multifamily, and SFR is about to do the same, just as a basic outcome of the lack of inventory.
Yeah, I actually to take the conversation a little bit askew, but as he talks about focus, I can't remember which part of the book, or forgive me if this was one of the other business books I was reading this weekend, but they were talking about diversification. Was that in his book, in the Great by Choice?
You have to go a little further.
Well, the diversification I'm thinking about is about how do you protect yourself from being too heavy, kind of like your expediters were 6%. That was on purpose in case they lost a customer. There's not all these layoffs. So Victor, our
Vice President of Engineering.
I was just going to say.
He's the one that got the VP title. Ryan's still our controller.
Oh, sorry. I thought he got it. Thought he did.
It's coming. Yeah, it's coming. Be patient, Ryan.
Don't screw it up, Ryan. Victor had been pushing us and saying, "Hey, what's going to happen with interest rates, and how might that hurt Digible long term?" That's the short of it. And where I'm going with that is on the expediter side of things. Is he and I in our one-on-one talk through how interest rates may or may not hurt Digible because of multifamily and what the business we do, but we don't have diversification really outside of rentals, as you were saying. And when we know what happened with the pandemic with like the tourism industry and how a lot of the folks we know in our network had, really been hurt because, tourism just crashed. So I haven't yet been able to come up with what is the risk, at least in the current, let's say the next 5 years for rentals. I don't want to just be that naive, but I've really struggled to find out what within 5 years could be a risk. But if you look at 10 or 20 years, is there a risk of rentals? And then does going into single family rentals help us strengthen ourselves versus leaving ourselves, let's say, so exposed by just focusing on these high rises?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good argument, and we'll be on the board, I guess, as we go through this. But there's another word that starts with D that you could almost replace as the cautionary tale reason not to do this, which is diversification or distraction, because we have not had the distractions, I'll say, of single family or somebody pulling hard at us on senior or pulling hard on student. And I think part of this equation comes down to how big do you want to be, right? Because I think if your goal, not that ours is to IPO or become global, then you have to probably get more comfortable with, I don't know, distractions, or get more committed to diversification, because your TAM starts to sort itself out, right? And a lot of these public companies, that is, very much obviously expectations. They're going to keep adding more and more value to shareholders. And so somebody like Southwest, it's that much maybe more remarkable that they've been able to stay true to the SMaC code, but still continue to do just that, is grow and become more and more profitable and successful business. But for us, if we aren't interested in getting to whatever, I won't even throw out numbers, but to a certain size, then wouldn't that have a heavy hand in what we decide we want to shoot bullets and cannons at? It's like multifamily is a big enough industry. There's a lot of, I'm not saying I want to do that, but you get my point. It just seems like how big you want to grow has a big part of this.
Well, yeah, and our BHAG BHAG mission, 10 to 20 year goal was to become the largest in order to influence.
Multifamily, don't forget that part.
Yeah, right. Well, so that's the problem, right? 'Cause single family is not multifamily.
Right.
So that would be the biggest argument against.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I guess you would say maybe multifamily is the wrong word if the industry is adopting and moving into single family. The conversations we've had, it said, well, what's their tech stack look like? And a lot of the folks I've talked to have said, oh, it's a modified Yardi, for example. So then it's the same technology that stack, let's say, that they're using. And if that's the case, it makes more sense. But if we had to all of a sudden go integrate with some other, system that was set up for single family rentals only, I think that would be harder for me to swallow, as far as shoot, now we are really distracting ourselves.
Makes me think, I haven't thrown a movie quote out at you in a while, and I don't even know if you ever seen this. Did you ever seen Bull Durham?
No, I know Bull Durham, but I haven't seen it yet.
You got to watch that. Just wait for Nicole to fall asleep.
Yeah, that's you're
going to have
the other recommendations.
A list of those that you're going to hopefully start getting to here soon. But there's a line in that movie where, what's his name? The actor, Tim Robbins. He's this kind of wild, crazy pitcher, has no real work ethic. He's got this incredible talent, but Crash Davis is the character's name, but it's Kevin Costner, and he's asked to
she might watch it because of Costner.
Okay, Costner fan.
Yeah.
Well, he's asked to mentor Tim Robbins and really help groom him for the majors. Meanwhile, he's losing his shot.
Mm-hmm.
He's been in the minors for a long time, and so it, needless to say, does not sit well with him. So he's trying to teach him the ropes and kind of, I guess, a SMaC recipe for baseball as a player. And one of the things he tells him is, whatever you do, don't F, you don't have to do the sound drop or beat, but don't F with the winning streak. And because he's thinking about washing his socks or something, and he's like, you don't wash your socks, you don't wash your underwear,
Mm-hmm.
you don't do anything when you're on a win streak. And it lines up with this, right? It's like, if Digible, using ourselves now very directly as an example, is having great success and growth, and things are going so well, as we said, are we effing with the win streak,
Mm-hmm.
By pursuing single family? We've tested, and experimented plenty of times up to this point, but maybe this would be kind of the most significant, I'll say, expansion or potential expansion of the company. I think it is fair to say that, wouldn't you? Like if we got serious about single family.
Yeah, I guess it depends if it's bullet or cannonball versus or nothing, like
Right,
receiving it.
right,
Like we have a lot
right.
of folks who are receiving from right now. Now there's other receiving that we've turned away because it's been too far afield.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say if we went and focused, like Nicole had mentioned to us, like maybe we should focus and try to be the, preeminent single family rental agency. So I guess if we make that decision, then that would be changing a lot of things. Versus, hey, we can apply the same SMaC recipe and be successful there. Then, I accept it.
Yeah. Well, maybe if it's okay with you, just talk a little bit more about, I don't want to say what gives us pause with single family, but the dynamics of marketing, like digital advertising for single family, that are unique to single family versus what we see with multifamily, senior, or student. So just trying to tee you up here, kind of that scatter notion. We don't ourselves yet know about the budgets, but is it fair to say that single family, even more so than multifamily, but is basically just living from a marketing and advertising standpoint, just living off of listings? Like they haven't figured out a different path, but now it appears that, I don't know if it's a groundswell or it's top down, but we're hearing from more and more in the industry that they seem ready, if not eager, to experiment, explore different avenues of marketing these properties than just putting it on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, the MLS, wherever. So
Yeah,
why don't you?
I'd love to get start interviewing some folks that have more experience in single family to understand the motivations. I've got my own assumptions where you would think. In fact, I've talked to some folks before that have done single family rentals. Now I think about it, a lot of small property managers will start doing single family because they deploy their own capital, and they've told me that they make more income or well, whatever. They just make a greater return on single family rentals than they make in multifamily, but then they eventually all try to upgrade to multifamily because it allows them to deploy more capital faster. Like it's really hard to spend 30 million on single family homes, easier to spend 30 million on
Right.
on a mid-rise. But that's what you do because if you're accessing capital, borrowing it, you want a bigger, you want to deploy more of it as fast as you can to get, it's kind of your beauty of the and with Ryan, where it's like, it's not just about percentage return, but and like how much return, right? So in this case, it's kind of the reverse where they're all of a sudden moving from spending, 30 million bucks on a building to then saying, let's go buy these $500,000 homes. I think part of that has to be driven by the market where single family homes are getting so expensive. Also, I think some of it must be driven by the lead time needed for a multifamily new development. Like you got to take 5 years to plan and build it to start leasing it out. So if you're trying to deploy capital quickly and you're looking at it from start to start, easier to buy these distributed homes than it is to go build a building and lease it. But then there's all those other operational concerns. Sorry, I was giving a lot of background before your question. So where was your question again? Reroute me.
Just whether oh no, it's about the advertising.
The
How it
difference.
yeah, like how would you approach this? Do you think it makes sense? Like so putting yourself in the shoes of, and I'm not going to say that one single family rentor, but actually, you mentioned the capital, but some of these capital, firms that are coming in betting on SFR, what would you tell them as far as a marketing or digital strategy?
Yeah. So I wanted to give that background so that to say how we understood or how I understand at least the market's getting set up. So now you do have some built to rent happening, but that again takes a lot of years of planning. So as far as what's hitting us quickly, it's these distributed single families. And for those, I think you have to treat it more like a regional site like you were before, or at least one major corporate site. Now, the problem with multifamily corporate sites or regional sites has been that you have a one bedroom you're leasing within one building out of like 30 buildings. And so the way that the websites have been built today, they're not showing you the 300 units that are available for your query in that zip code or something. They're showing you buildings. So it's like you can look at these buildings, they all have one bedrooms, but there's not been an easy way to really compare and contrast those different ones. Versus now it's more, I think about like Zillow where you're doing home buying. Where if you don't have that layering where it's like, okay, it's within a market, within a building, a property floor plan, right? Now you remove that and you say, hey, I need a house within this area and I would like these features. And now it shows all of those houses that are available, even if they are distributed. Now, what's unique about that for your paid media is previously folks were using the ILSs a lot at a corporate because it was easier to control, where it's like, all right, put all of our properties up there and, the audience will find it and, we'll lease them out then. When people were going to more of regional or corporate sites themselves, building a miniature ILS, they had all those problems with those competing buildings. And when you have competing ownership groups, it also becomes a challenge of like, which one shows first on my site? Now, if you're doing all of these single family units, it's not that you exactly struggle with like which one shows first, but it should be driven back to your point about building an ILS. It should be more driven by the query and saying, where does this person want to live? What features do they want? And show that individual, I'll say unit, but actually house. What I like about this strategy, though, is what we couldn't do with corporate conglomerates before was drive to that particular unit that someone was searching on Google for. But in this case, we could. So we could actually take their inventory, and as they search on Google and we drive them to this, let's say regional or corporate website, we could actually drive them to that individual unit for sale, or at least a bunch of units that are similar. And then you could figure out for their web team if they want to randomize those units if all things are equal. So I just like that in that case, they can get way more deliberate with the media buying as long as there's a lot of automation involved. What I don't like about it is I feel like the cost per lease may be higher. So that's why I'm hoping that their cost per, I hope that they're, you would think that the folks moving into a single family home are going to stay there longer than folks moving into an apartment, that they're less transient, in which case you're going to make it back up on lifetime value. But TBD for me on that one.
Yeah, totally. Well, this made me question the whole Amazon and Google thing that we've gotten into a few times, but when, if ever, I suppose, will they enter the real estate space? But if they did, would it be almost more interesting for them to enter into SFR than to multifamily? And I just so easily can picture it. Maybe I've watched too much sci-fi or whatever, but I feel like it's already, happening. So I'm not going out on a limb here, but why shouldn't I be able to just, if I was, trying to either get into a single family rental or downsize, whatever, and just ask Alexa or ask Google and say, Google, tell me 5 single family rentals that, I should be looking at, or list 5, whatever. Forget about the verbiage, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just seems like with all the data that those two have between everything you buy versus everything you're searching would be so much further ahead than any ILS or technology platform that could be created, that they would just deliver an incredible, I guess, experience, and ultimately like some great recommendations and speed the whole process up.
Well, have you ever bought something via Alexa?
No, not verbally, no.
Yeah, that's what I think is interesting.
But this isn't saying that the transaction happened. I'm talking more the virtual.
Yeah, I think the problem for me is like the imagery. Imagery is so important. So when you're just doing the voice assistant, it doesn't. You don't.
Yeah, I'm picturing a screen, like, because most of these devices now are coming with screens. There's less. I don't know what the trends exactly are, but less of just ordering the tube, if you will, and more are getting some sort of screen with it.
I could definitely see that with like Zillow. Like Nicole and I have made it a pastime at, if we're down like the hill and we do some errand and we're like, oh, let's see what kind of houses are around here. Then it's like we spend 20 minutes like looking at our phones for Zillow. And instead I would much rather like, hey Zillow, take me on a tour of homes for sale under $1 million or something. Like exactly. That would be interesting more as like a pastime versus, I guess, versus serious shopping. Now, I still think that, to your point, like whether it be Google or Amazon or what have you, I think obviously Zillow makes a lot of sense, but I feel like for them, they are usually catering to, well, that's not always true, but often when they enter a market, they will like to cater towards the money, and the money would be the property management companies. Therefore, you need to set it up more for multifamily than single family, because a lot of previously single family rentals had been driven by the small landlord. So unless they wanted to start fielding all those small landlords as far as trying to squeeze them for dollars. But Zillow has struggled with that too, we've seen. So it's like Zillow's the closest thing we've seen for people with rentals. What could be interesting though, I'm thinking is like if you list your home on Zillow, if it almost said, "Hey, did you know you could probably rent this for like $3,500 a month?" And then Zillow starts like siphoning some people there. That way, it's like you have pause. You're like, "Oh shoot, maybe I don't want to, sell it. Maybe I will start renting it."
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it is interesting, but I just feel like if they're scared of multifamily, they're sure as hell scared of single family.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's scared or not, but I still feel like it's imminent. They've obviously disrupted the auto industry, and now, well, I don't know where they're at with jobs, but obviously Google definitely has a job board as well.
Yeah.
So just I can't imagine this not happening. My question is how, what will they attack first? Because real estate's such a big
Right.
beast.
It seems like single family sales would be their more like what they would think of first versus rentals.
Yeah, so they can get in on the transaction.
Yeah. It is interesting though, because like I used to be worried about, oh, what if Google did what Digible's trying to do with our technology? But the longer we've had Digible, the more I'm like, it is so hard if you're not focused. And to your point, like to me, Google doesn't seem to have a lot of focus, and their bullet versus cannon isn't very well honed. It seems to me.
Yeah.
Like there's just been so many things that they always like let die. Versus, I guess Amazon has had a lot of things that let die, but they've for the most part have done it more as bullets, and then they like move heavy. But I guess I just don't worry about Google moving into, I guess like rental real estate anytime soon.
Well, while you're saying it, just made me think Google's suffering from its own boredom. And in the book Atomic Habits, which I also just wrapped up, that book talks about one of the things that separates great athletes from good athletes is the ability to survive the boredom. And it was interesting because it was, it was a bit of a contradiction in what most people think about great athletes is that they have the motor, they have the passion. And he had talked to, I think, a couple sports psychologists about this, and he said that was the hot take, but also made a lot of sense. It's like, no, even the great ones, like a Michael Phelps, gets bored of getting up at 5:30 and getting in the water, but finds a way to deal with it. And it's not because he has this incredible, energy or more passion for it. He's just found a way in his brain to lean in, I guess, and respect the boredom, if you will.
Yeah.
But just how important it is to continue, the routine. And so I think that's something you see with Google is they just got so big, so successful, and right now it feels like they're just fighting the boredom.
Yeah, the discipline is right. Yeah, that is really interesting. Like, would Google like
I think about that with you.
Okay.
I really do. Like with when I run for even more than 2 miles, I sit there and I'm just struggling. And thank God for you, because you turned me on to audiobooks and podcasts. And now I feel like I have something to pass the time, because I could never believe with you were like, no, I don't listen to music.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you nuts? Like, how could you possibly be running 50 miles, whatever? I mean, these crazy distances you run. And as I was listening, ironically, to this podcast or this audiobook, and he's talking about that, I'm like, damn, David has figured out how to handle the boredom better than just about anybody I know. So, compliments.
Thanks.
Kudos.
I was getting that this last week at the game when everyone was like, "Oh, you do most of your running on the treadmill?" I was like, "When we get home, it's like dark and there's mountain lions." We just had a 140-pound German Shepherd get its leg taken off this week in our neighborhood by the mountain lion.
Holy cow!
Yeah. So I don't
terrible.
run outside at night.
Don't tell my daughters that story.
Yeah. So it's funny though, because you mentioned also earlier on the distraction and like don't wash your underwear or whatever. And I feel like I'd heard something like about Jordan with that too. But I was watching a thing on the treadmill about Steve Nash and his free throw accuracy and how he, I guess,
incredible.
Yeah, the highest
like a machine
career the highest career accuracy rate as far as a finished athlete right now. And he was saying that his coach or whoever would play distractions too, like air horns or whatever, because it's like during a game, like you can be perfect like alone, but the pressure of a game and like things that happen, like yada yada. So you got to build those distractions in. So in some ways, I agree you don't want distractions, but then the Bull Durham, like, don't mess up. I think that's can also be a hindrance because everything has to be perfect, otherwise you like get on tilt. Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many of these different.
Well,
like,
and the first book that you and I bonded on really was Lost and Founder by Fishkin, and he hits that one hard. He said we had all sorts of momentum, things going great, and then he came up with whatever it was, Moz Analytics or something.
Yeah.
And he was convinced that it was going to be a game changer, the next big thing. And I don't know if it's just those scars run so deep that you hear those lessons again and again, but that there's probably just as many examples of where, people took that risk or did deviate from their core competency and found success. Probably not as much. So, but yeah, he just was like, we didn't have enough resources. We never were going to be able to make the commitment that we had to our core platform and business. And so it was in a way doomed from the start. But, and then you also have people that are frustrated because their own focus is being diluted. So unless you're willing to almost stand up a new business and really dedicate, the time, the focus, bring that kind of energy and passion that got you started or got you successful, in some other division of the company, is it worth it? Can you expect to find success? So that's where, again, the whole bullets and cannons, because, I don't think you and I would be comfortable not, experimenting and doing some testing. But we're also trying to be very sensitive to that whole lesson about distractions and focus.
Well, I wish we had more time for this question, but I still will ask you, as you make the point about, Google and getting bored, do you think that it's more likely that Google will last into, 2100 or Amazon lasts in the 2100? I'll get that answer first.
That's a fun one. Should have warned me. Actually, you can't warn me on something like that. All right. I need a hot minute here, hot second. Because I want to be able to defend this, not just flip a coin. I'm going to go with Amazon. And the reason I say that is because they've already had success with, the diversification that we just talked about, right? I can't, I guess, point to that with Google at this stage. And I know they have a gazillion products, and I'm sure some of them are more successful than I'm giving them credit for. But Amazon so clearly has evolved dramatically, from their roots, and with great success, not with, any kind of mediocrity. And so believing that because they've now penetrated massive verticals, right, and don't seem to have any plans of slowing that down. And a lot of it's been through acquisition, so it's not, a matter of them just doing it all kind of ground up. But yeah, that would be my reason, I guess, my faith that they will have more success. Both companies will be here in 2100.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wholeheartly believe that.
We got to do another episode on that because
you're ready
to
do a contrarian move.
Yeah, well, the reason I was
is one going to buy out the other in your world?
No. I was with you where it's like it's interesting because Amazon had more of a visionary, I'd say, with Bezos at the helm than what you had at Google. However, it seemed like Bezos really had to hone it over time and build systems to scale and build how to train and get the right people in there versus Google. It's almost like they're a victim of being so successful so fast and just having this it's like they always say about who's the boxer that quoted it's hard to get up and run when you sleep in silk sheets. But basically, like boxers, often once they become champ, they don't stay there. A lot of times they don't put in the same work because all of a sudden silk sheets. So I feel like that's Google. Early on, they just had success. It came easier to them once they landed on their innovative product model and funding revenue model versus Amazon, which did grind it out for 2 decades before they really started to rake it in. So I feel through that, Bezos set up a system for a great company versus what Google has done. Now, Google may be considered great just because it's making more money than you know what to do with, but that's just because how innovative that original product model and vision was, not because it's actually they're doing I'd say great work. I mean, they still may become a great company. It's just I think that they're more at risk than Amazon is based on everything we've talked about. And I think when you talk about diversity, even though they have the alphabet and they're trying to do like self-driving cars and all these other things, they don't seem to have figured it out the same way that Amazon, to your point, has figured it out. And so what if the metaverse takes over? I could see Meta coming in and taking over search for all your products versus like Google, right? Like if you had those, we talked about like Meta glasses or what those could be like if you didn't have a cell phone anymore, you just had your glasses. Now, if I have glasses that are just Meta and I don't have my Android or your iPhone, it's like now they have their own search engine because it's native. You know, good luck, right? Like now you could ask it like, what's the next home look like, and your glasses have your imagery, and then
yeah, I definitely want to pick this up because I just have to say one of the things that I think is going to challenge Meta from getting to that level is actually the irony is it's what got them to this size in the first place, which is the social, like. And knowing their audience better than anybody, even though Google has probably just as much data, if not more, they're not seen that way. Whereas Zuck and Facebook, now Meta, is dealing with all that bad press and paranoia about, you know, their notifications, their content, you know, their deep fakes, all this stuff. And so will they ever get that level of trust back, if they ever had it with the world, to say now you can search on our platform, you know, through Meta, whereas Google has dealt with far less of that. So isn't it more likely that they could take a swing or build out the hardware and maybe not be as mature as Meta is, at least in the vision, but eventually catch up? And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that's one of the biggest hindrances that like Meta has.
Regulatory and public opinion.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect way of putting it.
Yeah. All right. Well, next time that one of our guests cancels on us, we can pick back up like who will last, Amazon or Google or whoever else you want to throw in there.
Yeah.
Well, this is good. We'll figure out, Erica, how you can name this episode. I feel like maybe we should just put like 3 different topics in the title this time. Yeah.
Blindfold her and let her throw a dart at the board.
Yeah. All right. Well, anybody that stayed tuned this long, appreciate it. Hope that you guys tune in next week. You always give a peace. Nothing.
Later.
See ya.
Hasta luego.